And Sherwin joins us live now from New York. Sherwin, is it fair enough to say the mood has shifted from some of the violent scenes we witnessed earlier last week to effecting real change, like the removal of Confederate statues?
Yeah, and the removal, Francis, of the Confederate statues is a really symbolic move. It doesn't really move the needle forward in terms of what people are actually protesting, in terms of police reform at the community level. But it has a symbolic message here that we recognize, what was fought in that Civil War in the 1860s. Essentially, several states in the South tried to secede from the Union because they did not want to abolish slavery in their territories. And so these are heroes that fought for slavery dating back 400 years in this country. So that's part of the conversation. It's about renaming roadways and freeways and buildings, and also part of a broader conversation of the repatriation to African nations of cultural artifacts, Francis, that were stolen from Africa during the colonial period. So George Floyd, really a catalyst for broader conversations about social justice, not just as you see on the streets of the United States today, but dating back some 400 years as part of a broader conversation.
And something we know about here in South Africa as well. So former President Barack Obama talked last week about translating the energy on the streets into tangible changes at the local level. That's where community policing happens. And we understand a big decision coming out of the Minneapolis City Council. Tell us more.
Well, what a lot of the protesters have been asking for is a big push now, Francis, for police departments, as they have come to be known, to be either changed fundamentally or to be wholly defunded. So this is a debate that's ongoing. But I will tell you that the mayor of Minneapolis, this is Jacob Frey, basically the guy who played a fundamental and catalytic role in the firing of those 4 police officers in conjunction with the police chief there, the 4 officers that were involved in the killing of George Floyd. He signed an order last Friday that essentially outlaws police chokeholds, banning chokeholds, and requiring police, Francis, to report and intervene anytime they see unauthorized use of force by a colleague. Now, the Minneapolis City Council went a step further. They are pushing, and they have a veto-proof majority to do this, for the defunding of the police department and replacing it with an alternative model of community-led safety. The president of the council spoke to this issue this past weekend. Let's listen to what she had to say.
Our commitment is to do what's necessary to keep every single member of our community safe and to tell the truth that the Minneapolis police are not doing that. Our commitment is to end our city's toxic relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department, to end policing as we know it, and to recreate systems of public safety that actually keep us safe.
And in a sign, Francis, of how protesters are no longer going to accept lip service from politicians, even those deemed favorable to their cause, let's watch what happened to Jacob Frey, the mayor I was talking about. He was asked a specific question this past weekend at a protest whether he supports defunding the police or not. He said he didn't, and then this happened. Clearly a message there from protesters that they're not going to accept lip service, even from those perceived to be their allies. And I'll tell you what, Francis, the members of the Democratic caucus in Congress, both the Senate and the House, revealing sweeping legislation that they hope to introduce in the House of Representatives this July. It's called the Justice in Policing Act, and it would create national policing standards, things like greater accountability. Now, as we've been explaining in our reporting, there are different jurisdictions around this country, different states, different police forces, different community police criteria, and what they're trying to do now is create national standards. So they talk about greater accountability, better training, banning chokeholds, mandating officers to intervene when bad behavior from a colleague becomes evident, easier to prosecute misconduct, and they're hoping to introduce this legislation as soon as July. But remember, you have a president, a Republican president in the White House, and a Republican majority in the Senate. So that's going to be difficult as negotiations there get underway.
Well, talking about that president and sending messages, a new CNN poll today saying that President Donald Trump's approval has dropped to 38%. So that's a drop of 7 points over the last month due to his handling of the protests and the coronavirus. We're now hearing that the White House may be considering a speech for the president on race unity sometime this week. What do you know, Sherwin?
This obviously, Francis, is not an easy subject for this president. So the first question is this going to be teleprompter Trump, or is this going to be the ad-libbing Trump that we've become so accustomed to? Look, the president had a bad week last week. After sending in the troops to disperse those peaceful protesters outside the White House so that he could walk over to a church and hold up a Bible in a photo shoot, really didn't resonate around the country. In fact, you saw multiple military retired officials, generals, his former defense Secretary Jim Mattis that we spoke about last week, really eviscerating the president because there's a great fear that he's acting like a dictator. And so he's really taken a punch to the gut here in terms of not only his response to COVID, but really a concern as we head into this election that the president is veering from the democratic principles on which this country is built. So the White House, I think, recognizing now that there has to be a reset, and we look forward to what the president will say. But it's a difficult topic for him, race and unity, for someone that's known to be quite divisive. We'll have to see what the president comes up.
Indeed. So, Sherwin, before I throw this question at you, let's see if we can bring up some live visuals from Houston in Texas in the U.S. That's where a final memorial for George Floyd was held today, and currently people are lining up. We've seen those visuals throughout the evening to view his body. And this, of course, where he was born, and it's ahead of the funeral tomorrow. What's the latest?
You'll remember, Francis, that there was, of course, a memorial in Minneapolis last Thursday. There was a second memorial in North Carolina where George Floyd was born, and this really the last stop for him. This is where George Floyd grew up, and thousands, as you correctly pointed out, expected to file past his coffin in Houston, Texas, ahead of that funeral tomorrow where he will be buried. That will be a private event. We understand that former Vice President and the presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden will be meeting with the family in private today. And really, I think also seeing an opportunity here, given the vacuum you're getting from the White House in terms of, talking about issues of race and social justice and redress in this country, Biden seizing on an opportunity here. Let's not forget we're in an election year. The black vote is critical to the success of any Democratic nominee. But this is also someone that has an understanding of pain, losing family members. He lost both his wife and his daughter in a traffic accident as early as 1974 when he was a senator-elect. And of course, 5 years ago, he lost his son to cancer. So this is someone that understands the pain of losing a loved one and will be able to really commiserate with the family on a very personal level, Francis.
All right. Thank you very much, SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease in New York. And of course, any details that do emerge publicly about that funeral service tomorrow, we will bring it to you, and those live visuals are coming tonight from Houston.